Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's Friday. Yay. This is one of my favorite times of the week, not just because it's Friday, but although, the fact that it's Friday is a good thing, but also because it is, we get to be here together and you never know what's going to come out of today. So here it is. A very interesting, this timing is going to be horrible for lighting because this time of year, it is starting to get dark already. I have my lights on because if not, what am I supposed to do? Turn my lights on as we're in the middle of this? So I kind of have, I should just turn this one off. This was driving me nuts. So there's right now, and but slowly as we go, the light will be disappearing. And I'm gonna, you know what? I don't know. Plus, it was snowing here yesterday. All the snow on Gary the Silver Fir has now melted off, but there is still snow on the ground. And I don't know why snow, the first snow of the year, means power outages and internet wobbles. Our internet is fiber, which means it shouldn't be affected by snow, but it is. And our power, I have no idea. So if I disappear from the stream, you know why it happened. So, but I have something exciting for you just to start us off, something completely new that I think you're going commentary. Sorry, I have a new intro. All right, I'm not rolling it very nicely. I'm kind of just showing it to you for a second, but I'm so excited about it because now I get to introduce exactly what it is we're doing. So without further ado, welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. Known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, I've spent over a decade working closely with plants, sharing their practical wisdom to help you embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In these sessions, I explore plant neurobiology, cognition, intelligence, humanities, and the birth of critical plant studies, all through the lens of personal evolution. Together, we'll break down the science to understand the mind of plants and how their wisdom helps us reawaken our own plantness, ultimately living an authentic life as a being of nature. What'd you think? What did you think? Exciting, right? Yay! I'm excited. There's going to be an outro too. We haven't gotten there yet, but I'm yay, super excited that that was set up. And so welcome. And I am torn today. I have to say, I am very torn because I have two papers that I could go through. Now, one of them is a paper in and of themselves, in the sense that it's a paper that we would read and be kind of conclude there. The other one instead is kind of the beginning of a longer discussion. Now, we've had some of these discussions before. This is a discussion that kicks off in, if I remember correctly, 2023. So we're talking about recently. Okay, let me be more specific because that's the way that we're going to help make these decisions. I'd love to be able to do both of them, but I'm not going to sit here for 4 hours, which is probably what it would take to do 4 of them. So we have one of them is a paper called Alien Plants Between Practices and Representations, the Cases of European Spruce and Beech Rose in Finland. Now, this is a paper that, as always, I've never read them, but I kind of like looked over very quickly. I skimmed the abstract just to make sure that it makes sense with the stuff that we're doing. So this particular one talks about the European spruce and the beech rose and how their cultural kind of resonances and ramifications and paleoecology to better understand on the ecology through cultural history, ethnology and history and linguistics and a whole series of things like that. So it's a pretty cool paper that we will do at some point, whether we do it today or we do it another day. The other one instead is a continuation of an ongoing discussion that we keep having around here with actually actors that we know as well. This is called Plant Sentience Between Romanticism and Denial, Science. Okay. So the thing about this paper is that it is specifically created with the intention. This is Miguel Segundo-Ortin and Calvo, who we have already read multiple of their sort of papers. And this is intended to be a discussion around, again, the differences in, how do I say this? Hold on a second. The assumptions around plant sentience and why science is either romanticizing it in the sense that there's like this whole pro-romantic side. Of course, plants are sentient for all these reasons. And then there's the complete wall of denial. Now, when I quickly looked through my list, and I have to seriously update my list because there's so much more. This paper is actually, because it's written in Animal Communications, which is a journal that calls for commentary. In other words, this is intended to be commented on. That means that there's a flurry of responses. So, for example, there's a reply called Plant Sentience, not now, maybe later. There's a reply from Calvo and Segundo-Ortin themselves, Plant Sentience Revisited, sifting through the thicket of perspectives. In other words, this entire issue of animal sentience is filled with all kinds of different papers relating to this, which means that if we are opening us up to having this conversation from multiple different angles, where alien plants gets us a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is my dilemma right now, because I am just trying to understand how it is that we want to operate going forward. In other words, do we want this to be middle, ending, end, and then we move on to a different subject? Or do we want to instead start thinking about this in a broader perspective? I don't know how I even decide. I guess I just have to decide, right? There's no easy way. I mean, unless you leave me a comment and you let me know what you wanted to decide, because it would help everything. It always helps to have some, input on which way to go. But yeah, so this is my two choices. The truth of the matter is that there's a bunch of other papers also in the queue. My queue has gotten a little bit messy right now because there's a thesis that I want to go through with you, but it's really long. So I need to figure out if I can cut it. And there are a series of much more technical papers that I've been debating how to go through, and even a few articles, because remember, now we're about in the middle and the end. We're in the the conference. Thank you. Oh, so hold on. I switched topics because I saw a comment. So here's the thing, Michelle. I couldn't get into the conference. I am very disappointed on that. I expected to be at a conference all weekend, like for the last 3 days. Today would have been the last day, and then I would have come here and quickly gone over things from the conference. The conference was in Turin, just an hour away, which the truth of the matter is that yesterday I wouldn't have been able to go anyway, because with the snow, I wouldn't have been able to go and come back. So it kind of all ended up being synchronic. But I contacted them because I kept checking the page, and there was no way to get to register. By the way, if my connection gets really, really bad, please let me know, because I can't always tell. Anyway, I contacted them and was like, hey, I've been looking at this page now for a while and I can't see how to register. And they were like, oh, registration is closed. And I was like, what? I've been staring at this and have not seen anything. And so they never responded to me after that. And I kind of took it as a sign. I think it was a paper. I think basically they must have just opened it for themselves. I don't know what happened. Anyways, I am going to be much better. This is one of my intentions for 2025. I want to start going more to these types of conferences. This year, I sort of relied on things that were near me or easy for me to get to. But I'm opening it up to all of you, that if you see plant conferences of this sort, interspecies, multi-species conferences, specifically around plants, because there are more interspecies conferences connected to animals, but not necessarily to plants. So I'm going with you, Michelle. I see your vote. Thank you. And we're going to get there. So yeah, I want to go to see more. It turned out to be all for a good thing, because I am going to be traveling soon. I am heading over to the United States for about a month. So I've been prepping, what I'm going to do with the podcast. And oh my goodness, are the podcast episodes so good. So good. So good. If you don't listen to the podcast, Reconnect with the Plant with Plant Wisdom, you should definitely go check it out because it is so good. I've also been working on some other stuff inside of the Naturally Conscious community. And you know how much I love everything we do in the Naturally Conscious community. And so it turned out to be a good thing. Plus some stuff here at Dom and Her that I had to work on. I had to finish translating a ritual. Okay. So with that all being said, now that we are ready, we have watched the intro, which was magnifique. We are going to dig into this paper. Let me just prep it. Oh, look at that. It just took over my entire face. Okay. That was not what I wanted to do. Okay, I wanted to do it this way. And then let me set it up into the right view. This mood. Just much better. Okay. So here's our paper, and here's the paper that we're going to be going through today. I think I can even make it not that big. I think I can. Why do you do this? You give me a little slider, but I cannot actually. I go from 150 to 200. Anyways, okay, fine. This is the paper we're going to go through. Now, like I said, this is only the beginning. This is the first paper, and then there are a bunch of discussion pieces afterwards. We will not be able to obviously go through all the discussion pieces today because it's going to take us a while. So I will now queue these all up. I'll try to do them as much as possible in order so that over the next few plant consciousness commentaries, I will do this. You know that I have had and continue to have for the longest time the idea of doing these multiple times a week on my schedule. Now, once I get the podcast sort of rolling a little bit more smoothly, then it will be easier for me to add a little bit more of this. I have so many things queued up for you. Seriously, so many things queued up that I want to share with you. And eventually we're going to get there. I will get there. So let's make this. I can't do any of that. Okay, let's get into this. Hold on. I want to make this easier even to read on my side. There we go. A little bit bigger, a little bit easier. And of course, your comments as we go are always welcome because, the chat is fantastic and I love it. So, plant sentience, between romanticism and denial, science. This is the first paper that calls out a whole series of things. We have read multiple papers from Miguel Segundo-Ortin and Calvo. So I highly recommend you go into the plant consciousness commentary section over on my website, and you can then look at all of these. They're also on YouTube so that you can see many of the old. This is the URL so that you can go over to the link and you can just go and see the old ones. Hold on, take that and get that out of the way. All right, here we go. Abstract. Oh, look, it included pictures of them. How sweet. Okay, sorry. A growing number of non-human animal species are being seriously considered as candidates for sentience, but plants are either forgotten or explicitly excluded from these debates. In our view, this is based on the belief that plant behavior is hardwired and inflexible. So not true. And on an underestimation of the role of plant electrophysiology. We weigh such assumptions against the evidence to suggest that it is time to take seriously the hypothesis that plants, too, might be sentient. Might be? We hope this target article will serve as an invitation to investigate sentience in plants with the same rigor as in non-human animals. All righty, let's get into the good stuff. Hold on a second while I reach. I always forget that when the temperature drops enough for there to be snow. Hold on, now I do need to turn this light on because now everything is changing with the light in front of me. Bear with me through my technical issues. Okay, not that I matter because really what you're looking at is the paper. But while I'm reading this, I also kind of want to very quickly grab some hand cream. I know, not very sexy or anything, but hey, it's necessary. Number 1, comparative cognition and the study of sentience in plants, an overview of the debate, which is funny because the debate has been going on and they're also contributing to the debate. So Sentience refers to the capacity of an individual to have felt states, including sensory experiences, external or internal. Although the interest in studying sentience in non-human organisms is increasing, this research remains, in our view, remarkably zoocentric. We hope to redress this tendency, inviting scientists and philosophers to address the question of whether plants too may be sentient. Our hope is to convince researchers that this possibility is worth exploring scientifically. Scientific study of non-human sentience, animal or non-animal. Why would you say animal or non-animal? How about animal or other? I don't know. Anyway, maybe that's just nitpicky. Is particularly challenging because direct evidence is lacking. Peirce questions the very possibility of determining whether a non-human animal is conscious because we observe directly the mental states of an animal. Echoing this view, Shuttleworth writes that the point of most researchers studying animal cognition is that how animals process information can and should be analyzed without making any assumptions about what their private experiences are like. In some ways, I actually think, and here's where I think that there's a major flaw in the way that we're approaching this entire subject. The flaw, in my opinion, is that most scientists are thinking, at least from what I am hearing, is the idea that if I study animals first, I can more readily understand sentience because animals, me being me as a human being an animal, therefore it's easier for me to kind of apply what I know about myself to an animal. The problem is that an animal is an animal, and nobody says that what I think is the inner world that an animal is experiencing is the same as the inner world that I as a human am experiencing. Therefore, if we were to reverse the logic for a second, or change the logic for a second, and think, maybe if I think about going first to study plants because they are so different, and I learn completely, didn't we read a paper about this, and I learn how to study and experience and think about plants and learn what a plant is experiencing in a completely different way, with a completely different nervous system that is not connected to the traditional kind of animal nervous system. Then when I come back to study animals, isn't it easier for me to be able to understand their inner world without assuming that it's the same as the human's inner world? It might turn out to be the same as the human's world, but we don't know this for sure. So isn't in some ways studying plants actually make it easier? I'm sure it's harder when you're doing the actual study, but wouldn't it make our understanding of animal worlds much richer and more specific to that animal rather than something human that we superimpose on an animal? That's just my opinion, okay? That's how I see it. But who am I? Researchers must hence rely on indirect evidence, whether overt behavioral markers or correlated electrochemical activity. This leap from observable behaviors and physiological processes to conjectures about private conscious experiences requires a justification. Andrews points out that the most researchers rely on reasoning by analogy. If a behavior that occurs when humans experience pain is also observed in other species, we might infer that there too is accompanied by the experience of pain, which could be an error, because it's not to say that what that animal is experiencing is the same as what we are experiencing. We can never be sure that the analogous behavior is accompanied by a subjective experience. The response to a damaging stimulus, for example, could be caused by an insentient nociception, damage detection, rather than pain. Moreover, analogy might be convincing with members of the ape clade and some other non-hominid mammals, but it loses its strength as the target species become more distant from our own. What kind of and this is the reason why we don't understand dogs sometimes, because again, their main sense is not the sense of sight, but the sense of smell, or some other species that uses another dominant sense that sense that we hadn't thought about at all. And therefore, how can we try to understand the world through that lens if we keep applying our own lens? It doesn't make any sense to me. What kind of behavior should we take as indicative of sentience in fruit flies? Is if there are conscious entities that do not behave like humans, and if there is consciousness that we cannot perceive, then those entities will be unjustly excluded. Plants. Quite different beings may fail to meet these criteria while still being conscious. Yep. The same rationale applies to neurophysiological evidence. There is no principled reason to deny that radically different neural structures could give rise to felt states. Hence, Balushka's assertion that plants have neuron-like receptors that should be recognized for the same behaviors that they're carrying out as our human neurons in a completely different physiology. Sentience is nevertheless being increasingly recognized in many animal species, from apes, mammals, birds, reptiles, and fishes. Fishes. I just like the sound of the word fishes. To octopuses or octopi, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, and other invertebrates. Based on behavioral and electrophysiological studies in invertebrates, Broaden and Klein argue that some insects may have the capacity for sentience. Why don't we just start with the assumption that if you're living, you have sentience? I don't understand why anybody would think that some living being does not have sentience. It just seems so bizarre to me. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I just want it to all be, I know our lives would be totally different. I was thinking about this the other day as I was having a conversation with some friends, and we were looking into, they were talking about dogs. Oh my goodness. It was not actually, it could have been a very ugly discussion, to be really honest, because somebody came to a meeting that we were in with their new puppy. And the new puppy, who's tiny, was inside of this little carrier and spent the entire meeting inside the carrier sitting on the floor. And I just kept staring at the carrier and I felt horrible. Now, I have to say, I have a different sensitivity. And for this reason, I do not have animals. And as you already know, I even struggle with my own, with the cats. I don't have a cat anymore. My cat is happily in another home with tons of land and going all over the place, which is what I wanted for that cat. Although the cat chose on their own. Anyways, that's a long story. But I'm looking around at the plants and I have conversations with these plants all the time, trying to understand exactly what kind of life they want to live. And I am not your traditional indoor plant person, not at all. I do not go and buy. I don't necessarily propagate unless I get a very clear signal. I'm still working on this. I'm learning. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to do these things. But dogs, they just seem so, for many people, humanly controlled. So I don't know. I'm not the right person to have this conversation with. So, and yes, I understand that. I understand that it's an instinct to start trying to understand the beings that are closer to you. It makes sense that it is, but we also have to take into consideration what Michelle says, which is that wouldn't it help us to understand the development across species to actually kind of start in evolutionary order? Maybe it'll understand us. Maybe we're limiting ourselves in the way that we look at ourselves as human beings because we're trying to assume that they have less than we do, rather than thinking that maybe they have other things that we do and trying to learn those because maybe that'll help unlock some other parts of ourselves. I don't know. I get the whole chicken and the egg perspective, but I just feel like we're losing out by trying to superimpose human sensibility on animal species. But it's just a thought. Even though they're very different from the brain structures thought to support sentience in vertebrates, insects' cephalic ganglia produce integrated neural representations of the world. Broaden and Klein suggest that such representations are indicative of sentience. Oh, little fruit flies, I'm not allowed to kill you. Okay. Note to self, do not kill the fruit flies. Therefore, do not leave anything in the house that allows fruit flies to be born. Seems like the best solution yet. Spiders is a whole other story. Spiders and I are having a very big discussion because my house is starting to look like a haunted house. I'm like, I love the fact that you're around here, but it's starting to look a little bit like a haunted house. It's too much. I look dirty. I look like I don't know how to clean my house. Anyway. Barron and Klein suggests that such representations are indicative of sentience, akin to those produced in vertebrates' midbrains, with the cephalic ganglia of insects functionally equivalent to the midbrain. More skepticism is found when we move beyond the animal kingdom to the possibility of non-animal organisms, such as plants, can feel. Some authors have tried to argue against the skepticism. The cellular basis of consciousness theory proposes a bottom-up evolutionary view of sentience. According to CBC, cellular basis of consciousness, CBC, sentience emerged as an inherent feature. Let's read this carefully. Sentience emerged as an inherent feature of the first life forms, including prokaryotes, and all biological taxa are equipped with some degree of feeling. I'm going with that one. That one works for me. CBC, cellular basis of consciousness. All adaptive functioning organisms from the earliest on must be sentient. A non-sentient organism would be an evolutionary dead end. I can agree with this. I can get behind this. According to CBC, to the cellular basis of consciousness, I have to keep saying it because I remember it, sentience emerged to facilitate flexible adaptation to the environment, which makes perfect sense. You have to be able to know your environment in order to adapt to it. Its complexity depends on the specific needs of each species and the characteristics of its economic niche. That was a Freudian slip. Ecological niche. Other researchers have argued that contrary to, cellular basis. Contrary to the cellular basis of consciousness, current scientific knowledge does not provide serious support for investigating plant sentience. Yeah, we're not going to look. We've read Thais and all, that paper, and we don't like it. We've also read Mallet. So we elaborate on these arguments in section 3. We agree that there is still much to be discussed before it can be accepted that plants feel, but we would disagree with those who would rather deny the possibility of plant sentience altogether. I am with you. Put me in that camp. I disagree with you if you try to deny it altogether. Regarding plant cognition rather than sentience, current empirical findings strongly suggest that plants can perform many putatively cognitive abilities once thought to be unique to animals. And this is a paper that we have read, Segundo-Ortin and Calvo in 2019. These abilities include the capacity to communicate with the plant's biotic local environment, to distinguish kin from non-kin, and modify behavior accordingly, to make flexible decisions about multiple options and trade-offs, if anything. Honestly, we could learn so much from plants about how to make decisions, how to make good decisions, if we gave ourselves the possibility to truly get into that decision-making model and study it. Wow, how many mistakes that humans make based on their conditioning and based on their limited perceptions, because our perceptions have been so constrained. How much heartache could we avoid if we learned how to take decision-making lessons from plants? I mean, seriously, it would be such a different thing. And even learn from and remember past experiences. Nevertheless, even if plants have surprising cognitive abilities, it remains debatable whether this is evidence that they feel any more than similar abilities in robots and neural networks imply that they feel. Anyway. And this is exactly what I think in some ways, Beth, this is what's happening. It would be great to have some of the researchers take one side and the others take another. This is happening. The problem that's happening, and I think the reason why Segundo and Calvo and Calvo are, Miguel and Paco are talking about this so often in so many of their papers, is because one thing is to take plants, let's just inherently believe that plants is sentient. And the other one is, let's be cautiously optimistic. The problem is that the teams that are taking the direction of they're not are literally trying to cut off funding. They're trying to cut off research. They're basically saying, this is a waste of your time. And I think that that direction doesn't lead us anywhere. This doesn't help us in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't take us into what we want for a scientific research. We need to have something happen. And I think that they're trying to, Calvo and Ortiz are trying, or actually Segundo would be, are trying to kind of be more, they're trying to push the envelope, and they're trying to provoke a response that says, fine, we'll do research on this and we'll see, and probably prove you wrong. But like you said, that would be two good directions rather than the direction of, oh no, let's not do anything at all. A series of striking functional analogies between the nervous system of animals and the non-neural vascular systems of higher plants has also been reported. See section 3 below. We are going to see that. These similarities have motivated some researchers to broaden the definition of a nervous system to include plants for a better understanding of how evolution has driven the features of signal generation, transmission, and processing in multicellular beings. And we have read some of these papers. The Expansion of a Nervous System, of the Terminology of Nervous System, was an excellent paper that we reviewed that helped us understand that what we today are calling a nervous system is really a human nervous system, and that rather, if we got away from the physiology of it and basically how it works to more what it does, and then we look for other organisms of all sorts to see who does this type of stuff in their own way, we would discover that many other organisms actually have nervous systems. It's been our definition that has prevented us from being able to see them, study them, and understand them. Multicellular Beings has argued that the emerging field of plant neurobiology offers new ways to investigate how plants integrate information from different parameters. In what follows, we review the current evidence on plant cognition, cognitive activity, and its electrophysiology substrate, which I'm not sure is the exact way we have to go about this, always sort of breaking it down to the mechanical science, but fine. For the sake of this article, of this argument, let's go with it. Section 2 examines plant cognition. Section 3 reviews electrophysiological processes that may underlie plant cognition and sentience. We conclude with some general remarks about the implications of these findings. Let's get into cognition. The interest in plant sentience emerges from observations of cognitive capacities in plants. Cognition in plants can be inferred from changes in their behaviors that improve their chances of survival. And here's another one of my little offsites that I'm just going to keep saying out loud, because then maybe it will change something. Maybe it won't. I don't know. We'll find out. Is it all based on survival? I mean, is this also part of the inherent block we have in trying to really understand plants? Because if we continue to think that everything plants do is only for survival, then does that prevent us from being able to see that there is desire and other motivators that might exist? It's almost like, should we continue to break the human down as to everything we do is about survival mechanisms, or do we have higher order kind of motivators? And if so, then what would happen if we were to apply those higher order motivators to other organisms? Maybe it's just adding too much. Maybe. I don't know. Good question. Maybe it's too much. Cognitive processes are sometimes the best explanation of their behavioral repertoire, with behavior meaning the observable consequences of the choices a living entity makes in response to external or internal stimuli. Plant cognition involves the manipulation of the environment in order to enable metabolic function. But not all plant behavior is cognitive. Plant cognition is inferred from behavioral patterns that are adaptive, flexible, anticipatory, and goal-directed. Remember these, because these are important. The evidence can take many forms, including time-lapse photography and specialized electrophysiological techniques, to identify complex morphological and physiological responses during ontogeny that would otherwise be missed. With all the citations in the middle, it sometimes makes the sentence hard to read. These techniques reveal that plants are highly flexible, being able to do more than simply react to the here and now in a fixed hardwire manner. Yeah, and that's a good point, Michelle. It's because they think like us. We give them our competitive behavior. Yeah. Well, this is a Darwin thing, right? Like the whole Darwin, as much as we love Darwin, because Darwin did open us to so many different things, but at the same time, Darwin also set up the idea that everything was for survival, right? Survival of the fittest, which is not really true. Survival of the fit, but it's a different. I don't know. It's a different kind of survival. I don't know. I have to. I've been seriously thinking about this now for a while. I need to kind of get myself into a different headspace for it. All right. Rooted in the Aristotelian, we don't like Aristotle, so on this distinction between motion and self-motion, one of the reasons plants have not been considered cognizers is that they were thought to be unable to control their own movement endogenously. Recent research on the patterns of growth of common bean shoots has shown that the bending of its vine is influenced by the presence of a nearby climbable pole. Okay, wait, hold on. I'm seeing that my internet connection got really bad, so I'm just holding off for a second. Also gives me the ability to drink something. Okay, there we go. Should be better now. If the bean vine's attempt to reach the pole fails, it straightens out and tries again. The fact that the vine's movements are continuously reconfigured in the attempts to reach the pole suggests that they are not ballistic, but endogenously controlled by the plant to attain a specific goal. 2.1, communication. One of the ways intraplant and interplant communication take place is via airborne volatile organic compounds. I always call them chemicals, compounds. VOCs are primary and secondary metabolites that plants exude through their leaves, flowers, fruits, and the rest of their plant bodies. The release of VOCs into the air is not a physiologically recycled byproduct of the assimilated carbon. Instead, many adaptive interactions are mediated by VOCs, operating as informational cues among conspecifics and members of different species alike, and among both mutualists and competitors. Ariel Novoplansky. VOCs may be emitted after a herbivore attack, permitting plants to adjust their phenotypes and trigger adaptive defense mechanisms. Receiving VOCs allows plants to protect themselves against a wide variety of sources of stress. Behavioral responses include attracting the natural predators of herbivores or pathogens and priming the plant's own defense to deter future damage. Where are we? A well-known illustration of the role that VOCs can play in non-kin relations is provided by Cuscuda, or daughter, a genus of parasitic vines that lack chlorophyll to photosynthesize their own food. They exploit the VOCs being emitted by potential hosts, such as tomatoes. They love tomatoes, unlike me. They love tomatoes. Daughters can combine, such as tomatoes and wheat to locate them. Daughters can combine chemical and light cues to discern both the nutritional quality of potential plant hosts and their distance and shape. Pretty neat trick, huh? I just smell around and I understand how far you are, how healthy you are, and what kind of shape you might have so that I might be able to, get to you. Sneaky. And then they say plants aren't intelligent. How do you think they evolved that? Didn't just sort of like come overnight. Other unexpected forms of communication include sensitivity to sound vibrations in plant invertebrate acoustic interactions. The model plant Arabidopsis thailandia can detect through epidermal outgrowths, hairs called trichomones, the specific vibrations produced by the munching of caterpillars. It can then respond to the caterpillars by synthesizing toxins. This is actually a really fun paper to go read through. Remarkably, Arabidopsis can discriminate the trichome frequencies caused by chewing from those caused by wind or insect songs. Trichomes thus act as a mechanical antenna, enabling Arabidopsis to respond in a selective and ecologically meaningful way. Similarly, Vates and al. Report that Onothera drummondi flowers exposed to sounds of the same frequency as those produced by flying bees produce sweeter nectar, increasing the chances of cross-pollination. Every time I hear this, I think of like a flower just sort of opening themselves and being, actually, I just set up a post for the Naturally Conscious community. I didn't want to post it today because I've already been posting so many pictures of the snow around here. But it's the super cute kind of African wolf, an Ethiopian wolf, which is apparently the most endangered animal in the world, or in Africa, the most endangered animal in Africa, maybe. And eating the nectar from, and being actually a pollinator for a type of spike plant. And it's so awesome to see. And I could just imagine the plant going, yeah, lick me up. Anyway, sorry, total side thing. Okay. Communication also takes place underground thanks to the interactions of roots with the mycelial networks of mycorrhizal fungi. The symbiotic exchange of information between fungi and plant roots results in flexible and adaptive changes to the plant side, including rapid changes in physiology, gene regulation, and defense responses. Similar communication-based symbiotic interactions have been reported between plants and insects, with plants able to control the behavior of their insect partners via chemical compounds. 2.2 is kin and species recognition. Evidence of the capacity to discriminate kin from non-kin and to distinguish between conspecifics, a member of different species, has been found in plants. Studies focusing on root allocation and interaction shows that Impatiens pallida specimens fight for resources more aggressively if competing with non-kin or strangers. That is, with unrelated conspecifics belonging to the same population. Similarly, root allocation in Cachil edentula increases when a group of strangers shares a pot, but not when groups of kin members do it. That's interesting. These findings suggest that root interaction and root-derived chemical exudates play a crucial role as cues for kin recognition and competitive kin discrimination, triggering adaptive behavioral changes. Further studies point out the importance of photoreceptors in kin recognition. Crepy and Casal, not to be confused with creepy, report that Arabidopsis recognized kin neighbors by detecting red to far red light ratios and blue light profiles. Arabidopsis interacting with kin produce more seeds than when they interact with non-kin. This is interpreted as evidence for cooperative behavior in plants. Yeah, this theory of lots of plants also control our behavior too. Pretty much all the crop plants have trained us to grow them is what Michael Pollan, right, the famous journalist and writer, often talks about, right? This is his big belief system that crop plants in particular have evolved a way for them to control us. And even in Stefano Mancuso's book, I think it's in Brilliant Green, if I remember correctly, also talks about this with amaranth and with a few others, where, amaranth started to look more like wheat in order to be grown more often. So there is this sort of belief system that there are several plants that have learned to control us humans in order for them to have a better chance of kind of cooperative survival. They're not going to add that here though, because I think that would be a little too much for the human neuroscience's mind. Their mind just go from that. I don't think they can handle it. 2.3, decision making. Huang et al. Writes that one reason many theorists resist applying cognitive vocabulary to similar organisms, especially those without traditional, I'm adding the word traditional, neurons, is that their behavior is thought to be just the product of reflexes. Plant researchers are no exception to this tendency, yet the current evidence suggests that this view of plant behavior is purely reactive and mechanical is mistaken. Yes. And yes, crop plants do have the last laugh, Michelle. I agree. When a target system selects an option from a set of alternatives, and when this choice displays a level of reliability and repeatability that is greater than chance, we agree with Reed al. That it should be interpreted as decision-making. Because plants inhabit complex environments, behavioral decision making, e.g., choosing between alternative courses of action, such as direction and rate of growth, is imperative for them. Like animals, plants must decide about where to best forage for light and nutrients, among other resources patchy distributed in different qualities and concentrations, and about repellents to grow away from. Also, this goes to my comment about the fact that it's not just about survival, in the sense that plants have to choose, yes, for their survival, but we have all lived with plants in different environments where we get to see other experiences from them. Let me see if I can explain what I want to say. Where you're like, why are you growing in that direction? Speaking of which, Diplodonia and I have to have a conversation about that specific leaf, not leaf, that's growing toward my curtains when I told you no curtains. Everybody else is not growing towards the curtains, and you know that I don't want you growing toward the curtains. So the more I can convince Diplodonia to not grow towards the curtains, which has nothing to do with survival, but has everything to do with my aesthetic for my home, the more I realize that not everything is being done for survival mechanisms only. And I think that is, I know it's another layer of research that we're not going to get now, but I do think we are going to get to the point where we start to research and understand that not everything is being done just for the perspective of survival. Anyway. Vox mediate decision-making in Cuscuta, although both tomato plants and wheats elicit the directed growth response of this parasite vine, experience has shown that it prefers the former to the latter. I told you they like tomato more. When both options are presented in tandem, that is a clear choice that has nothing to do with straight up survival. It's not about nutritional content. It's not about health of a plant. It is just a desire. They like tomato more. Although both tomato plants and wheat elicit the directed growth response of this ladder further back. Results indicate that although Cuscuta exemplars are sensitive to a variety of vox, they respond preferentially to those produced by the most nutritious host. Likewise, Trevawas reports that when exemplars of Calamangrostis canadiensis are offered adjacent habitats to grow, they choose the habitat with the best conditions of competition, warmth, and light. However, C. canadiensis can also discriminate these conditions in combination, choosing light plus warm soil in preference to others. But in breeding for human, Beth, I'm not sure I understand your comment. But in breeding for human purposes, we eliminated some genes. Oh, you mean in plants? Sorry, in breeding for human preferences, we eliminated some plant genes. Yeah, I know. Don't even get me started for all of this. That's a whole other piece of it. But we're not going to get into that right now, which is true. I mean, and that's why this is a comment I had and a conversation I had with Mancuso that he did not like. To be honest, he did not appreciate my conversation on this and quickly shut me down, which was, you will hear in so many different studies talking about Arabidopsis, right? Arabidopsis, the model laboratory plant. It is a plant that is most often used for straight up research in laboratories. And my comment is it possible that if Arabidopsis has been in laboratories for the majority of their lives, and you are just propagating seeds from laboratory Arabidopsis, could it be that Arabidopsis has forgotten how to be a wild plant? And therefore, wouldn't it be better for you to release all the versions of Arabidopsis, all the species of Arabidopsis that you have, all the beings of Arabidopsis, and maybe alternatively better pick up, that's not the right word, go and forage for wild Arabidopsis in order to have more pure results? Yeah, they didn't like that. They didn't like that thinking at all. And so, that was quickly shut down. Because that would imply that they not only have sentience, but enough, as Beth was saying, that we've also not conditioned them in some ways. And well, we're not even going to go there. Okay. Decision making also takes place in the root apparatus because high concentrations of salinity can disrupt plant cellular biochemistry. Roots have evolved sensitivity to abnormal saline conditions, adapting their growth accordingly. Li and Zhang studied salt avoidance behavior by growing exemplars of Arabidopsis in a medium with increasing levels of salinity. They found that roots started to bend upwards, inverting their natural gravitropic behavior before reaching the high salt agar at the bottom. This indicates that roots can sense ion gradients and make decisions that enable roots to stay away from higher salt. This kind of behavior represents a sort of basic go, no-go decision, also referred to as global inhibition. Similar studies concern avoidance behavior and competition in individuals of the same species. In a series of experiments, Cahill and colleagues, I kind of like Cahill. I like Cahill because Cahill is honest about Cahill's intentions and what it is that he's trying to study. Measured root growth in Abutilon theophrastus while manipulating both competition, alone and with a competitor, and resource distribution in the soil. As the authors explained, their goal was to determine whether root foraging behavior was an additive response to multiple forms of environmental information or whether plants use novel behaviors under different combinations of conditions. The reports indicate a striking level of flexibility. For example, when plants grew alone, they displayed maximum root distribution, independently of how the resources were distributed. Root foraging behavior changed when a competitor was present. Oh, I need to go check my notes. I saw an excellent description of this during the conference that I did go to at Padova that was talking about an experiment that showed just how much this whole competitor and kin and sharing of root structures and how far they will share information about it. It was very cool. I have to get that for you all. I haven't done that. Although their root systems strongly avoided each other when growing into a soil with homogeneous nutrient availability, if a nutrient-rich patch was placed between the two exemplars, plants grew roots in the high-quality soil, overriding their usual avoidance tendencies. For the authors, this clearly indicates the plants integrate and combine information about nutrient availability and neighbors when making decisions concerning foraging, and that root placement for this species is determined by a hierarchical set of decision rules. There is traditionally been some resistance to describing the behavior of plants as decision makings. One argument that supports this resistance is that decision-making requires a single individual evaluating the costs and benefits of different courses of action. This point is raised by Fern, for whom the concept of the individual to which intelligence and behavior are intimately linked cannot usefully be applied to plants. For him, because plants do not have a central controller, something equivalent to the brain, it always goes back to the brain. Oh yeah, Michelle, it could be a personal space thing. Yeah, kin recognition plus personal space, but even that, personal space, when do I allow? Going back to root sharing and stuff. How much personal space do I need also depends on how much I get along with the person that's with me. And this is, I think, that the part that they're trying to show. Plants do distinguish between who's with them and who's not. Okay, so going back to the brain, because we always get back to the brain. Plants cannot be considered as individuals in the proper sense of the term. Instead, plants must be understood as aggregates or collections of cells. Their behavior is the sum of adaptive responses of the cells. No, and no. Hence, because so-called decisions of plants are not determined centrally, which would be better. Our problem is we're weak because of the brain. There is no choice made by the plant. Rather, events occur within the plant that dramatically change the balance within the economic union with consequent changes to the fate of some of the members of the union. Fern concludes that applying cognitive terms such as decision-making to plants is both unproductive and unjustified. You see now, Beth, why you can't have them going in multiple directions at once, because one direction wants to say, no, we don't study this. That's the problem. It would call for a level of individuality and centralization that cannot be found in plants. The view that decision-making requires an individual, and most particularly a central controller, is contested in the contemporary literature. However, for example, Reed et al. Propose a more encompassing definition of decision as the action by an entity, individual, organism, or group of selecting an option from a set of alternatives based on characteristics of the alternatives that the entity can perceive. These authors add that such a definition makes possible the comparison of the decision-making capabilities of different entities, regardless of their nature or level of complexity. Similarly, a series of papers co-authored by Beschel, Huang, and Bick, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, examine the evidence about decision-making from a phylogenetic perspective and conclude that many decisions in nature, including some performed by mammals and human beings, are controlled by hierarchically distributed mechanisms. If these authors are right, then there is no reason to exclude plants from making decisions because they lack a central controller, as Fern does. And hence we go to the idea of hives, hive bodies, hive thinking. And yeah, I mean, I don't even know if that's what it is, because a hive to me implies kind of multiple organisms that all come together to think together. And I'm wondering if that's really the right view, or if it's, again, a whole other mechanism that we're not ready to recognize yet. We're just not there yet. We don't have a mentality. It's kind of like 6 of 9 from, what is that? Is that Next Gen? No, that's Voyager, right? Six of 9. Like, you will be the Borg. You will be assimilated. I don't know. I mean, that's probably not a good description, because that has a negative connotation to it. All right, moving on. 2.4, risk sensitivity. Decision-making and comparative cognition is studied from economic and biologic perspectives, whereas economic models of decision-making focus on logical processes that maximize expected utility. Biology-inspired models adopt an evolutionary perspective and assume that individuals seek to maximize fitness. As Petrillo and Rosati explain, one fundamental way in which biological ideas about rationality differ from those in economics is that the context of decision is assumed to have a major impact on its fitness consequences. Animals may show context effects that appear irrational from an economic perspective, but which in fact minimizes their fitness. Here is the point that I think we're getting to, that I was talking about. It's the one area that I actually still don't understand enough how plants do it to be able to have a really great discussion. So I'm looking for, Voyager. Yay, that's it. It was in Voyager. Sorry, I froze. Hopefully I'm back now. Okay. If I do freeze again, let me know, because it helps me to understand how to read what's happening around me. But yeah, this whole idea of risk aversion and also irrational decision making is something with plants that I think most of us who live in very close proximity, in the sense that we observe and have relationships with our plants, probably see irrational behavior. But those that are studying plants don't see that irrational behavior for lots of different perspectives. So let's see what they say about it. For example, it is expected that an organism will take more risks in foraging when it is in a poor energetic state. In contrast, it is more rational to behave in a risk-averse way if satiated. Likewise, organisms are expected to prefer low-quality food if the risk of predation involved in acquiring a better quality food is too high. For many researchers, these decision-making processes provide evidence of cognitive sophistication, for they require that different parameters be integrated and compared in order to make a decision as to how to act. Experiments that involve trade-offs are designed precisely to measure the adaptability and flexibility of decision-making processes. Some non-animal species, such as Physarum polycephalum, aka slime mold, display such flexible decision-making under risk conditions, and so do plants. This is the one we want to hear. We want to hear this. And so do plants. For example, in a series of experiments with P. sativum, Denner et al. Demonstrated that root growth can show risk sensitivity. They framed their experiments in relation to risk sensitivity theory. The theory predicts that there is an inflection point in which they switch between risk-averse and risk-prone behavior maximizes fitness. Risk sensitivity theory is commonly used to study rational decision-making in human and non-human animals from a biological perspective. For their experiment, Denner et al. Used split root pea plants, actually this way, whose root tips grew in separate containers and allocated different nutrient regimes to both pots. One pot received a constant concentration of nutrients while the other one received a variable. Experimenters found that if the nutrient concentration in the first pot was enough for the plants to meet their metabolic needs, they grew roots in this pot. However, if the concentration of nutrients was insufficient, plants allocated more roots to the pot that received the variable nutrient concentration, a behavior that is interpreted as risk-prone given the context of the experiment. For Denner et al., these findings suggest that plants respond strategically to patches varying in their average of nutrient availability, and that they can switch between risk-prone and risk-averse behavior as a function of resource availability. Commenting on these findings, Schmid goes as far as to claim that they indicate that when faced with choices concerning different environmental conditions, plants make rational decisions in favor of the option that maximizes their fitness. For him, this implies that the theories of decision-making and optimal behavior developed for animals and humans can be applied to plants. Similar experiments involve trade-offs concerning the expression of defensive traits against herbivores at the cost of other plant functions, such as growth and reproduction. I wish that we could see the emotions of the writers of the paper when they were writing it. Like, I just feel like in some of these statements, they want to slap around like those that go against what they think. I just think that. I think it's possible that they're like, see, can. Like, I feel like they want to use more italics. I feel like they want to do, some more of that and like put some bolds in there, but they're not allowed to do it. And hello, welcome, aloha to ACT Holistic Tactics. Yay! Welcome. And let's see. Beth, what were you saying? I was thinking of some teams starting with animals and some teams, when you were talking about the two directions that they could take. I think that is already happening. There are definitely many teams that are working with animals for sentience, and there are those working with plants for non-human sentience. The problem is, more than anything, that the ones that are against the idea of plant sentience altogether are literally putting obstacles in the way. They're not just saying, well, you go off and you see what you find, okay? If they were to do that, it would be much less of a problem. The big problem is that they're literally putting obstacles. I just realized that with this view, I'm like covering myself with this big comment, but they're literally putting obstacles in the way. And because funding is limited, this obstacle becomes an extremely important consideration. Now, the positive is that the general public is having a lot more about the discussions on plants. But this is also the concern that these particular researchers have, which is that the general public's view on this topic is very romanticized. And they also think that they fear, let me say it this way, that this idea of completely accepting all forms of plant sentience, all of us that are more kind of spiritual in nature in particular, and articles that come out that have like Peter Wohllebin's book, The Secret Lives of Trees, they feel like it's almost fake news and it creates the wrong expectation out into the world. So this is really the fear from the perspective of the scientific community, which is that the preponderance of articles that are coming out there are talking about, they're calling it scientific subjects around the way plants interact and their ability to communicate, but they have kind of these spiritual overtones to them that don't always completely fit into the science, or they're just using different terminology that scientists don't appreciate, kind of a la Susan Simard, who has chosen, instead of using the term hub tree, she uses mother tree. And they say this causes a lot of confusion out there, and therefore we should reduce someone like Simard's funding, because why would we give her funding when she's just going to put out misinformation? This is kind of where these arguments are going, and where they're calling the biggest problem spaces is all connected to this, is exactly what I was just saying. And so it's not as easy as just, hey, you go study plants and you study animals. First of all, these scientists want to work together. Also, like what the plant scientists are like, hey, you're doing all these super cool experiments, and if we worked with you, we could design experiments where you could add plants into that as well. And those scientists don't want to do that. Those human neurobiologists that are very like closed-minded around this topic. So as you can see, it creates a series of blocks that are just unnecessary, and it's because it doesn't allow us to really get to the science, to really get to the deeper understanding. We don't think the science is always going to give us, but at least the science can give us some part of it. I see that my connection is bad again. Hold on, give it a second. It'll come back. Yeah, and I think that these are the types of things of like, so plants have been getting animals all kinds of work for them, birds and mammals, eat the fruit, distribute the seeds. This whole sort of interaction, it's probably not just unclear, but for some, they don't want to go there as to who called who. Did the bird kind of push the evolution of the plant, or did the plant push the evolution of the bird? It's a mutual like symbiosis and a growth, but these parts, to try to put them into definitions for some of these scientists, can be really scary, because again, they don't want to believe that plants can manipulate us. And because plants are such a core central feature of our entire lives, right? Our food systems, our clothing systems, our survival from the perspective of our housing systems, and so many other parts are so deeply connected to plants. These questions, these types of discussions are much broader. The part that is disappointing to me personally is that nobody brings up this fear. Everybody talks about how the human neurobiologists that don't want to believe in plant sentience just don't want to believe it because of the brain, which is true. But they're talking about the fact that, survival is what motivates animals. And they don't understand that their own survival instincts are kicking in and saying, shit, if I recognize plant sentience, which is, in my opinion, why they're also dragging their heels on certain kinds of animal sentience. Because if I have to recognize the sentience of the dog that lives with me, at what point can I justify crating that dog? At what point can I justify the person that takes, the woman that, there's a woman who lives around here who takes her dog everywhere with a tutu and a little bows in their hair in a stroller. And sometimes the dog climbs out and runs out. Or my friend who has a cat, who always has the cat inside the house, and the cat, every time you open the door, tries to escape. If you start to say there is sentience and there is consciousness in these animals, can you justify the way that we currently live with them? Not even talking about plants, let's just talk about animals. But then moving that a step further when you get to plants is, can I justify the agriculture that I grow and the fact that I constrain plants to grow in a certain way? I have no longer am foraging or forming a relationship with my food. I am mass killing and mass throwing away food in order to feed people through a supermarket? Can I justify fast food, right? All these types of situations become much so much more complex, and nobody is talking about that elephant in the room. Everybody is going to the discussions that we're having right now. And if I had to grab them, that's where I would be like, okay, and human neurologists who talk to me about everything is driven by fear and survival instinct, talk to me about the fact that you don't want to see this because you're being blocked by your own survival mechanism. That's the way that I think, and that's what I think is actually happening here beyond everything else that we're talking about. So who knew? Who knew? And you're right, Michelle. I do think that there is like a definite, who thought that these funny looking apes would come and change our entire system? But here they are, and we also evolved. So the question then is, how are we supposed to all evolve together? I'm happy to hear that you were learning so much. Oh, you're right. I'll get the other one. Hold on. You changed it. Learning so much. And that you're here. I'm super happy about that because it is true. And we're all learning so much from our animal and our plant friends, right? We're learning so much when we give ourselves the opportunity to learn from them. But are these people learning from them, or they're learning, by using them? I don't know. Let's keep going. Taken together, these findings suggest that plants can engage in complex decision-making, integrating and weighing information from different parameters and trade-offs, and prioritizing responses to improve the chance of survival. In other words, plants do not select courses of actions randomly, but seem to evaluate available alternatives in a context-sensitive and flexible manner. As Moulton et al. Explicate, even within a simple plant, multiple environmental cues will combine and overlap in affecting mechanotransductive signals, hormonal response, differential growth, and ultimate change in shape. As we see in the following section, the complexity of plant decision-making and multi-scale stimulus integration is further exemplified in experiments that involved anticipation and assessment of future states of affair, something we have gone through multiple times in different papers. All of the idea of how anticipation also adds another level of cognition to everything that we understand about plants. We hold that these kinds of behaviors cannot be understood as individual responses to single stimuli. Anticipatory behavior. Getting things wrong can be rather costly when it comes to fitness. Only those organisms that have the ability to act ahead of time can survive in a dynamical, ever-changing environment. Furthermore, if we consider that plant behavior takes place across very slow timelines in comparison to animal behaviors, and that changes are often irreversible. Hold on, I'm thinking about this. I guess they are irreversible. That makes sense. We can see why plants cannot afford not to be able to anticipate the future. For a basic example of anticipatory behavior, consider the leaf laminas of Lavatera critica that reorient during the night in order to face the direction of the sunrise. Heliotropic, so heliotropic means movement following the sun, different from phototropic, which is behavior that is following light. Nocturnal reorientation can be retrained for a number of days in the absence of solar tracking. Anticipatory behavior has also been observed at the root level. Consistently with the findings of Denner et al., Novoplansky, Shemesh, reports that young exemplars of Pisum sativum grow different roots if subjected to variable, temporarily dynamic, and static nutrient regimes. For example, when given a choice, plants allocate more root biomass, so they grow more roots, their roots grow bigger, not more roots, but the roots grow bigger, in patches with increasing nutrient levels. The striking fact, however, is that they do so even in the cases when dynamic patches were poorer in absolute terms than the static ones. For Novoplansky, this indicates that rather than responding to absolute resource availabilities, plants are able to perceive and integrate information regarding dynamic changes in resource levels and utilize it to anticipate growth conditions in ways that maximize their long-term performance. This result further reinforces the idea that plants switch between risk-averse and risk-prone behavior depending on context. Motivated by these findings, plants have been characterized as anticipatory engines. Accordingly, plants also constantly monitoring gradients in order to guess what the world is like. These predictions allow plants to minimize surprise and to adapt to the yet-to-come environment conditions via phenotypic plasticity. In other words, they can change their reactions and the expressions of their genes based on their expressions and based on what they think is going to happen, with the hope that what they think of is going to happen is what's really going to happen, and that's going to be most efficient for them. Learning and memory. The literature on plant learning and memory can be traced back to the 19th century. Considering habituation, for example, habituation occurs when the response to a repeated stimulus decreases, and this decrease is not due to, say, sensory adaptation or motor fatigue, which is, by the way, the human neurobiologists love to just assume that something is, that's just a sensory adaptation, or, oh, no, they're just too tired. That's why the plant's not reacting anymore. Because if you give them another stimulus, they're going to react. Silly. An early study on habituation was conducted by Pfeffer on Mimosa pertica, demonstrating that repeated mechanical stimulation led to a decrease in leaflet closure. More recently, Galliano et al. Have studied habituation in mimosa. They call it habituation because the human neurobiologist got mad when she called it learning and said, no, that's habituation. It's super annoying. Super, super annoying. Anyway, more recently, Galliano et al. Have studied habituation in mimosa in the context of light foraging and risk predation. Rather than simply confirming Pfeffer's discoveries, two striking facts about this phenomenon were reported. First, leaf folding habituation was more persistent for mimosa exemplars growing in energetically costly environments, basically environments where they didn't get enough light. This indicates that habituation is responsive to environmental conditions. Second, the habituated reflexes could last up to 28 days. This suggests the acquisition of long-lasting memory in mimosa. If mimosa can remember for 5 days, why do you call this habituation? And why is it not memory? Why is it not learning? Like some of these. Subsequent studies have sought more sophisticated forms of learning, such as classical conditioning. This takes place when a conditioned stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus that elicits a reflex. After a number of CS-US pairings, so conditioned stimulus, this is your typical Pavlov's dog, right? Conditioned stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus, right? You feed you give a dog food, their mouth, you let them smell the food, they salivate because they know that the anticipation of the food, then they start eating. So then you eventually replace the food with a bell, and they still produce the same response because they anticipate that the food is going to come, and therefore they have now had a conditioned stimulus, which is the food generates saliva in the mouth, paired with an unconditional stimulus, which is the bell that is being rung. This is something that has been shown by Galliano after training pea plant specimens associated with the presence of a fan. So instead of giving light, she conditioned, so light means growth, grow towards the light, and instead she taught the plants to grow towards the sound of a fan, completely different. Besides measuring expressional changes in heat-responsive genes, Bandawat et al. Have reported the occurrence of averse conditioning in Arabidopsis. Last, NASA Poissoniana adjust the timing of their pollen presentations based on previously experienced pollinator visitation intervals. All these experiments suggest that plants can learn from past experiences, eliciting changes at the level of behavior and phenotype for the sake of maximizing fitness. Needless to say, the research on plant learning and memory is just flowering. They made it funny. Flowering, sorry. And further independent replications are needed before we can claim confidently that plants are able to learn. Are we? Do we really? Do we really have to wait for more? In fact, the literature yields a mixed bag of negative, positive, and unclear results, because there's a bunch of people that say they can't replicate some of the studies that have been cited. Adelman reviews these results, and Galeano et al. And Markle discuss the evidence or lack thereof for associated learning in plants. In light of the inconsistent results being reported at the Minimal Intelligence Lab, this is Paco Calvo's lab, we are currently attempting to replicate Galeano's results independently. We have identified 11 methodological factors that must be addressed, from germination and transplantation of seedlings to experimental design and apparatus issues. We have proposed a number of ways to overcome these hurdles, such as incorporating non-invasive time-lapse photography for finer control in the administration of stimuli, monitoring plant growth throughout the experiment, and increasing statistical power. We are as yet unable to report conclusive evidence for or against associative learning in plants. To draw ecologically meaningful conclusions, it will also be important to extend these experiments beyond the lab. That we all agree with. We have to do it beyond the lab. Foraging and competition. The capacity of plants to integrate information from different variables plays an essential role in their ability to develop different strategies for nutrient foraging. Latzel and Munzbergova, hopefully that was pronounced well, report that clones of Fragaria vesca can associate locations of soil nutrients with particular light intensities, and they can use this previous experience to anticipate the presence of nutrients in new environments. This experiment confirms previous evidence that epigenetic memory of previous interactions provides clonal plants with an advantage for foraging in not yet occupied environments. Hold on a second. Give me a second. So they associate locations of soil nutrients with particular light intensities, which seems very similar to Galeano's experiment. And then they can use this previous experience to anticipate the presence of nutrients in a new environment. Oh, okay, we went through an entire paper connected to clonal plants and their advantages. Totally worthwhile to check out. It was very, very interesting about how they share information and knowledge and memory across the clonal plants. Just this seems okay with an advantage. They definitely have an advantage because they're clonal, they're identical, so they have all the same information from one sort of emanation to another. Foraging is also affected by competition. Cahill measured patterns of root growth in Abutylian theoprasti while manipulating both competition and resource allocation. They reported different foraging behaviors depending on the conditions. When plants grew alone, they displayed maximum root distribution as well as breadth, independent of resource distribution. However, when competitors were present, plants adopted different foraging strategies depending on the allocation of resources. Similarly, Grumman et al. Conducted a series of experiments with Potentilla reptans, where they stimulated different light competition settings. They found that Potentilla can tailor its phenotype, namely induce changes in the vertical inclination, leaf area, and so on, according to the relative structure and densities of their opponents. There's a lot of like, I see you over there, and I'm going to change based on what you're doing over there. But nobody says it that way. That would be an easier way of saying it. The studies of Grumman et al. Demonstrate that plants pick up information from their competitors. How they do this? Nobody knows. Do they sense them by seeing them, which is one of the hypotheses? Or do they smell them through chemical signals? Who knows? To make decisions about appropriate foraging strategies. Recent studies have been performed at the level of root interaction. For example, Cabal et al. Have successfully applied game theoretical models originally designed to predict strategic interactions between decision makers in zero-sum competition games, to predict the behavior of Capsicum annum competing for soil resources. Mimicry. Mimicry refers to the adaptive, this is what I was talking about relating to how do they see? How do they see the other plant people around them. And I'm literally using the word see on purpose. Mimicry refers to the adaptive similarity or resemblance between a mimic organism and its model. Whereas mimicry is a well-known phenomenon in the animal kingdom because we mimic everything. Whereas, examples of true plant mimicry are less frequent. I don't know. Poison oak is one. I think it's poison oak. It's not poison ivy. It's poison ivy, poison oak. One of the poisons is a very good mimicker. With documented cases in plant literature being scarce. An illustration, nonetheless, is provided by Gianoli and Carrasco-Urra, who represent that the leaves of Boquilla trifoliotata, actually Boquilla is probably the most common cited example, or exemplar, as they say, can mimic the leaves of its supporting host, including size, shape, orientation, color, and petiole length, among other features. Moreover, the same individual can mimic two different hosts in a series. According to Gianoli and Carrasco-Urra, mimicry in Boquilla is related to predation avoidance. They gain protection against herbivores by climbing onto trees whose leaves they mimic. Pretty clever. No, but plants aren't smart. Plants aren't smart. No sentience there. I just learned how to climb up somebody else and say, ooh, I'm going to mask myself by making myself look like you. Look like you. Not smell like you, not taste like you. Look like you. And plants are not intelligent. Mimicry by Boquilla has also been observed with complete lack of tactile contact. So I can see you because I can't touch you and like a blind person check out, your features and choose from there. Mimicry has previously been observed in other species, such as Australian mistletoes, who's also a parasite. But in the case of Boquilla, the absence of any physiological connection between vine and support, together with the impressive because mistletoe is a parasite, means that mimicry might be because they somehow take something from the plant that they're parasitic to. Together with the impressive serial mimicry, counters some rival hypotheses as to the underlying mechanism. Two rival hypotheses are airborne VOC, volatile organic compounds communication, and horizontal gene transfer, which we're not going to get into in this paper, but we have talked about in more detail horizontal gene transfer. However, taking into account that physical contact is not needed for mimicry to take place, a more radical hypothesis has recently been advanced, a plant-specific form of protovision, akin to the ocelluloid-based vision found in cyanobacteria and some dinoflagellates. I could tell you from a totally non-scientific perspective that phylovision exists. No scientific basis to that, so take it with, the grain of salt. This hypothesis finds preliminary support in a recent study conducted by White and Yamashita. The authors placed artificial plastic vine models above the Boquilla exemplars and found that as the plants grew towards the artificial plants, the leaves adopted a very different shape in terms of area, perimeter, length, and width compared to the controls. White and Yamashita interpreted these morphological alterations as attempts to mimic the plastic leaves with no volatile organic chemicals. No, plants are not sentient at all. Finally, Schaefer and Ruxin studied deception by orchids, Ophrys exaltata, and Epipactis helleborine, and distinguished between plants relying on mimicry to achieve pollination and those relying on the exploitation of perceptual biases of animals. According to the researchers, since the exploitation of perceptual biases is less restrictive strategy than mimicry, the former could be a precursor for the evolution of the latter. Hold on. Exploitation of perceptual biases is less restrictive strategy than biomimicry. The former could be a practice for the evolution of the latter. Interesting. As they explain, if distinct plants exploit similar sensory biases, they can be within reach in animals' perceptual world for mimicry to evolve gradually. I need to think about that one, so I'm not going to comment on it. Note that we are focusing exclusively on mimicry as occurring within one lifetime, not over evolutionary time, because of course then, the human neurobiologist would say it doesn't count for some reason. As we see it, what makes these instances of mimicry cognitive interesting is that they involve adaptations to the current contingencies of the environment, that the same exemplar of Boquilla can tailor its phenotypic to mimic different hosts from different taxa even, consequently invites explanations that prima facie resemble those invoked to account for the behaviors of some animal species. Numerosity, 2.9. We're still only in 2, although we should be pretty far along in this paper because it's like we've read a lot. As research in animal cognition shows, numerical competence and ability to estimate and process discrete magnitudes such as the number of times an event occurs is shared across a wide variety of phyla. We've talked about this. Plants can count. That's really what they're saying. Numerosity means plants can count. Number space mapping in chicks and numerosity in honeybees first came to light in non-mammalian species. As Rapp et al. Observe, insects can use action potentials to encode basic numerical concepts non-symbolically. Yet, if insects can help themselves to a number of action potentials are the electric responses of kind of behavior. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's basically in a simple thing. To solve numerosity related tasks, the roots of numerical competence can be traced further down the tree of life. This goes back to what Michelle was saying, that maybe we should look at it the opposite, like than the way that we're thinking of our, like us and then looking backwards. Maybe if we started farther down the tree of life or up the tree of life, I don't remember which direction you might think of it, then we would get a little bit better data that's not so biased by our own conditioning. Plants may well benefit from numerical competence during hunting. The carnivorous plant Dionea mushipula, Venus. I like how of all the plants we've labeled, all the ones we've just been using the scientific term, this one we call Venus flytrap. Why not all the others use their colloquial terms? I don't understand. Can we keep track of the number of times that the trigger hairs located in the inner side of the snap trap are stimulated? When an insect lands on the trap and tilts the mechanoreceptors in the hairs, it induces the firing of action potentials responsible for the closing of the trap. Remember, I was saying action potentials, behaviors. Yet, for the trap to close, a second stimulation must be repeated within 20 to 30 seconds, which means plants know how long 20 to 30 seconds is. Otherwise, the cycle resets. Besides, it appears that Dionea can store information bioelectrically for short periods of time. In other words, it has short-term memory through bioelectrical signaling. I'm putting this into non-science terms, discriminating the number of stored signals even further. When trapped, panicking insects repeatedly touch the trigger hairs, inducing the release of acidic enzymes that decompose them. However, once the trap has been shut and the prey is tracked, Dionea keeps counting episodes of mechanical stimulation, only releasing its digestive enzymes once it has reached 5. Because you're already in there. And what is it? Do you know why they're doing this? Think about it for a second. Of course, if the animal, the insect, is writhing around, right, and they hit once or twice, and you've already sent some enzymes, it might take a little while for that enzyme to actually take effect. But if I get 5 hits over a period of time, in other words, literally individual hits, it means that the amount of enzymes that I've sent out is not enough. That insect is still alive and squirming around. I shouldn't have that many hits. So I'm going to set out another dosage of acid, of acidic enzymes in order to decompose that insect. If instead I only get 1, 2, or 3, I might, it's just giving a little bit of time for the enzyme to work. Pretty clever, huh? Pretty clever. Further studies are needed before we can claim that plants exhibit neurosity-related abilities. I hate that they show all these studies and they're like, no. And before we can tell how sophisticated such abilities are in relation to those exhibited by animals. Okay, fine. I'll give you that one. Nieder hypothesizes, however, that plant sensitivity to numerical quality, even if rudimentary, may play a role in enhancing adaptive decision-making in various ecologically meaningful ways. And imagine all the things that plants are actually doing that we humans don't do, and therefore we do not even recognize that they're doing. We're here talking about all these numbers, 10 items now when we get to swarm intelligence that are all things that we as humans do. But can you imagine all the things that plants are actually doing that humans are not doing and that we as humans are incapable of actually recognizing and seeing? This is why working with plants in a different way, in my opinion, is just as important as the scientific study. We need other ways to enter into relation with plants if we're going to truly be able to expand our own paradigm and recognize plants for everything that they are and everything that can do. Burry et al. Have reported that the Venus flytrap has plasticity to adapt its carnivorous skills to different prey. It could snap its trap shut after one single stimulation that would serve to elicit 2 consecutive action potentials. Swarm intelligence. Swarm intelligence, the collective adaptive behavior of a decentralized group of individuals in response to sensory input in the vicinity, is common in bird flocking, ant colonies, fish schooling, bacterial colonies, and even human communities. Yes, we humans swarm. Recent evidence suggests it could be present in plants as well, actually. Okay, I'm going to tell you a fun little story here. Actually, I'm going to make myself big for this one. Here's a fun little story about this. I like this one. Try showing your dog 3 treats and then only give them 2. Dogs can count 2. I love it. So when I was studying under Mancuso was telling us a story once, and I think I've told the story a few times, but it's always worth telling it because it's a great story about how when at one point he was given some funding to build some kind of plant robot-y type things where plants can move around on a little platform that they can control. And he says that somehow they got more money than they expected. So they just built out a bunch of these different robots, like these different little platforms that were robotic and the plants could control. And so they had this warehouse with all these plants on these little carts that the plants could drive around. And what they started to recognize was the plants started to swarm. They would mass move to like windows toward the light and to other sort of stimuli for them. And he says before whomever was giving them the funding recognized that they gave them too much and took back the funding, therefore took back all the equipment, they started to witness the plants over time moving in these big swarms in certain directions. He said it was pretty cool because he hadn't conceptualized, the swarm mentality in that way. So I think that that's another experiment that should be done. But there you go with the whole funding thing. As mentioned earlier, growing root apices exhibit complex behaviors and decision-making about where to grow. Sizak et al. Report that complex root systems deploy coordinated growing for resource optimization and competition too. Individual roots can induce a change in the direction of growth in the roots of their vicinity, giving rise to episodic patterns of coordinated activity among individual root apices. Swarm behavior of this kind is crucial for adaptive success, for it helps maize roots scan the soil structures collectively, enhancing their ability to detect nutrient patches. This is the reason why in the last paper we did last week, we were talking about the plantoid project that Mancuso worked on with, I can't remember her name, another scientific researcher on a more mechanical side, and how they were thinking that robots that explore the ground more like roots using this type of example would be more effective than the traditional robots that we build that are more based on human models or exploration in a very sort of human-centric and movement as in walking or as in rolling over, rather than the way a plant would explore new soil. So that if we're going to go to Mars, it would be much more efficient to have a plantoid or a device that lands and then starts to burrow into the ground and then builds with a 3D printer out the root system that is in order to explore and extract through a root tip is much more effective than any other kind of mechanical system that we could think of that needs to drill into and then extract through another mechanism. It's a pretty neat project. It's more biomimetic in some ways, but we got into that last week. We don't need to get into it this week. Swarm behavior of this kind is crucial for adaptive success. Wait, no, I read that. Elaborating on this, Balushka, Levyadun, and Mancuso speculate the information transmission between individual root epices can take place via the combination of different mechanisms. Actually, Balushka continues down this path. This is kind of the main area of his research, including internal neuron-like electrical activity, segregated chemical volatiles, and finally, the electric fields generated by each individual root, apart from whatever mechanisms enable swarm behavior in plants. The study of root behavior seems to indicate that roots can solve problems collectively. Yes, they can. Okay, so 3, we finally made it to 3. Plant neurobiology framework for the study of plant intelligence and sentience. Plant neurobiology studies plant signaling with the aim of providing an explanation of how plants, as information processing systems, perceive and act in an integrated, purposeful manner. The rationale that underlies this scientific endeavor is that intelligent behavior requires information to be integrated with an eye to coordinating physiological needs among the different plant structures. Decision-making, kin recognition, learning, and the rest of the competencies reviewed in section 2 call for the information integration of the plant body as a whole. To alter traits in the phenotype and achieve flexible global behavior, plants cannot rely on a single source of information. To make foraging decisions, for example, plants must process incoming information concerning many parameters simultaneously. These include both biotic and abiotic parameters, ranging from light, temperature, mechanical or vibrational cues to variations in supply of water and humidity, the distribution of resources in the soil, the presence of volatile and non-volatile chemicals, and many parameters. All of these informational resources get combined to maximize fitness and decision-making efficiency. The goal of plant neurobiology is to understand how the information signaling mechanisms across the root and shoot systems that give rise to intelligent behavior in plants integrated and fine-tuned. Several disciplines are called upon, including molecular biology, electrophysiology, biochemistry, evolutionary and developmental psychology, and plant ecology. As a reader may have surmised, the very idea of plant neurobiology is not free of controversy. Duh. It was coined by Brenner and colleagues. Different authors have reacted against it. Yes. Alpi et al., we reviewed that, and Struick et al. Have argued that the concept is based on vague analogies and adds nothing to our current understanding of plant physiology, ecology, and metabolism. Brenner et al. Then responded that plant neurobiology creates an important and yet unfulfilled niche for plant biology, and that the use of neurobiological terms and our understanding of plant behavior has generated ideas about how to understand the broader picture of plant signaling. Similarly, Trewavas has argued that neurobiology concepts are an essential adjunct to the imaginative scientific mind in confronting some of the most recalcitrant problems in plant biology. These disputes are far from settled yet, not even close. We do not believe it is useful to debate whether neurobiology is the most appropriate term for organisms that lack neurons and synapses. We agree that it is important to be cautious and critical with metaphors and analogies. The concept of neurobiology might prove useful in understanding the physiology of chemicals and electrical activity in plant cells. What justifies using concepts from animal neurobiology to characterize plant signaling and behavior? Even though plants do not have neurons and synapses, Balushka would argue with that. He still thinks that there are neuron-like and synapse-like characteristics in the root apex, and I think that is a bad idea to just discount that. But whatever, fine. I know that Calvo doesn't like to stir this pot. that could give rise to a nervous system. Restricting the term neurobiology too tightly to neurons risks missing many molecular level functional similarities between animal and plant signaling systems and substrates, which is what we saw in the paper on expanding the term nervous system and how important it would be to do that. A case in point is the capacity of plant cells to produce and support action potentials when exposed to different stimuli. Lee and Calvo argue that even though textbook characteristics of action potentials focus primarily and often uniquely on those produced by neurons, the AP of plants closely resembles those action potentials in animals. Okay, why is any of this important, right? Why are we getting into this piece of it, and why do I always read this part, right? I struggle sometimes, I'm going to be totally honest with you, on how much to get into the deep core biology, because obviously I'm not a deep core biologist. I think you come here to learn the deep core biology. At the same time, in order to not show my own biases, which, you know, sometimes exist and sometimes I'm pushing hard not for them not to exist, I want to make sure that we have at least that minimum foundational structure to be able to have a coherent conversation upon this. Action potentials are probably the base that everybody who wants to have an eloquent discussion, potentially even with a biologist, maybe not with a neurobiologist, although I have tried and it has been really interesting, would be to understand how action potentials work, why they're important, because we as humans have them, plants have them. The music of the plants, for those that like the music of the plants, works with action potentials, and therefore there is an importance in understanding. That being said, I might skip over big swaths of this where they get into the exact chemical compounds that are being released within plants, specifically different kinds of plant hormones and different kinds of chemicals that are kind of the same thing as we as humans would have. So I'm going to try to do the ones that maybe are easier for us, not easier, it's not the right word, that are probably more relevant to the information that we are looking to get in this stream, because you know you're here and I want you to get the kind of information you want. That being said, it's always helpful when you leave me comments and you give me either questions or you tell me this is interesting and I like this and I'm enjoying this, because it helps me understand what level of depth. I read the whole paper anyway. I will have to read the whole paper anyway because I need to get into this and I feel like it's really important to get into it. But I just want to make sure that I'm giving you what you're coming here for, because, you know, that's important. Okay. This is so despite the differences in their molecular compounds, resting potentials, and speed of propagation. Plant action potentials exhibit the standard threefold phase of depolarization. See, I'm not going to go into this because this isn't. And they're talking about how action potentials are similar to action potentials in other kinds, in animals. So that's really what this whole section is trying to talk about. And hold on, I'm reading through it very quickly. Yeah, all of this section is specifically getting into the actual mechanism of how action potentials work and how other kinds of electrical systems that our plants produce, even though they are molecularly different than what, for example, is being produced, their behaviors. This is very similar to the conversation we had about extending the definition of central nervous systems in order to encompass more what they do rather than how they do it. So this is all to explain how it is that plants do the same thing animals do via a different mechanism. So how are electrical signals traveling across the distances? How are different sensors being understood? What is the plasmodesmata channels and how do they operate? All of these different pieces in order for you to better understand the vascular system and the nervous system equivalent, in quotes, that plants have, and how this really acts very similar to other pieces. I'm not going to get into all of the details because, again, this is electrophysiology that I don't even want to read wrong, in the sense that I don't want to give you any kind of wrong information. And since I am not an expert on this part of it, I mean, I've read it, I kind of know it, and I understand what's being said, but I always feel a little queasy sometimes when I'm trying to kind of explain it to you because I'm afraid that I'm going to explain it in a way that doesn't make enough sense, or I'm going to give you an explanation that sort of is the way that I see it, and it might not be the best for you. So I always recommend, if you want me to get into this type of stuff more in detail, please let me know, because I can, and I'm building up my vocabulary. But if not, I'll just kind of like, just understand that what they're saying is, we went through all of these things that plants do behaviorally. And now we're going to go through all the different mechanisms that plants have biologically that respond the same as what animals do. So that's really what we're looking here. And this part is kind of important based on this discussion we're having about animal neurobiology. Chemicals known to play a role as neurotransmitters in animals, such as acetylcholine, glutamate, in particular, glutamate is an often one that we talk about when you're reading through these papers, you read it a lot. Dopamine, histamine, noradrenaline, serotonin, and GABA, I'm not even going to pronounce any of that, are also found in plants. And this is an important aspect because this is what Belushka keeps talking about, of like, what are you talking to me? Yes, it's true that there is not the exact same neural system that humans have, but it's not that plants don't have anything. They have all these same neurotransmitters that are floating through there. Is it possible that they have a completely different system that still does the exact same things? So glutamate too serves to increase calcium ion concentrations, assisting in propagation of electrical signals throughout the plant after wounding, and a bunch of other stuff. As noted in the introduction, all this evidence has led to Miguel Tomé and Llinas to support the broadening of the scientific definition of nervous system. This is the paper that we read. We read this paper already, and it's in, if you go back through the plant consciousness commentary, and you can go to this link and you will find that, but it's always, the link is always going to be included in the show notes so that you can also find it. But yes, you will find that we went through this paper. It's super interesting because it completely changes the way we think of a nervous system, which I think for anybody who works with nervous systems is like a trauma nervous systems in humans, kind of going at it from the plantness perspective could be a really interesting angle to help you sort of enter into a different relationship with the nervous system in a completely different way. And also to think about more healing and soothing of the nervous system that is little less based on the biology, but more based on the intention of what it's supposed to be doing. Because if it's traumatized, it might not react to the biology that we've been thinking about. Just a kind of something to think about for those of you that work with nervous system kind of regulation and stuff like that. So as not to include plants, defining our target systems by what they do and not by what types of tissues carry out the functions of interest, which is what I was saying. Using the same neurological terminology could help reveal what is going on when plants carry out the various cognitive functions that have been reported. Searching the vascular bases of natural behavior provides the opportunity to correlate plants' behavior and phytoneural activity, even though a thorough understanding of plant signaling is yet to be achieved. The current working hypothesis is that cells' electrical excitability and its propagation are partially responsible for the capacity of plants to respond to changing environmental conditions as coherent, globally organized units rather than an amalgam of stimulus response mechanisms. For more complete knowledge on how electrical conduction takes place in vascular cells, we must determine how electrical, hydraulic, and chemical signaling pathways interact, triggering integrated and synergistic responses at the level of plant systems. In other words, more plants are going to die in order for us to understand the mechanics of all this crap, because we can't just accept based on the behavior. We have to get into how the biology is working. That's pretty much what they're saying. Producing such integrated approach to plant signaling and behavior is the ultimate goal of plant neurobiology. Some authors have argued that the emerging field of plant neurobiology can also provide a new way to approaching plant sentience scientifically. According to Calvo et al., aside from the obvious differences between the nervous system of animals and the vascular system of plants, plants lack none of the functional structures that are supposedly needed to be sentient. They are lacking none of. Terwavas et al. Hypothesized that changes in levels of plant sentience will be consistently linked to changes in long-distance electrical signaling and vascular complexities. These authors proposed time-lapse observations. Calvo loves time-lapse, just so you know, loves it because he thinks that speeds up the ability for us to see behavior, and therefore we're much more likely to recognize behavior when we see it in a time-lapse. Electrophysiological recordings and phytohormone secretion as potential indicators of sentience in plants. One promising way to investigate plant sentience involves the use of anesthetics. We've also gone through this paper, as well as it was a part of Calvo's book, Planta Sapiens, which we read in the Plant Wisdom Book Club. Not only do plants endogenously produce anesthetic compounds such as ethanol, ethylene, and divinyl ether in their tissues when stressed, but they respond to exogenous administered anesthetic treatments too. In other words, they pass out. They pass out, which means if you pass out, you must have a consciousness to which lose with the anesthetic. I don't know if that's really the right argument, because could it be? No, because it's not a global numbing. Anesthetic is not a numbing. It's a whole different, anyway, sorry. Venus flytrap snapshotting behavior ceases under general anesthesia. The same occurs with leaf folding response in Mimosa pertica after mechanical stimulation. The current working hypothesis is that anesthesia compromises the integrity of the plasma membrane by dissolving the lipid bilayer. More biology, thereby altering key membrane properties. According to this theory, anesthesia would affect plants similarly to the way it affects animals. You're not conscious. Look at there. Namely, by disrupting the firing of action potentials. In particular, anesthesia would act on the action potential inducing glutamate and GABA, which are otherwise animal neurotransmitters. Plants reacting with neurotransmitters the same as an animal has. I can't believe we have to say this over and over again. We've been reading these same studies for the last 10 years. It's crazy. To inhibit the production of electrical signals, which is where your pain comes from. An alternative to this lipid membrane theory is the protein receptor theory, according to which the membrane changes interfere somehow with receptor proteins. Either way, you don't feel pain because you're not conscious of it. Even though the mechanisms and biomolecular functions underlying how anesthetics disrupts plant behavior and responsiveness are not yet understood, Balushka and Yokawa suggest that since anesthesia in humans induce a loss of awareness, this could also be hypothesized to occur for plants. Go figure. We're using similar terminology. It is possible that anesthetics not only disrupt plant behavior, but shut down plant sentience and awareness altogether. The idea of plant sentience has recently been contested by Taz et al. Taz, by the way, is a human neurobiologist that does not want to believe in any form of plant sentience and plant consciousness. Their argument is twofold. They argue that the capacity to process environmental information for adaptive behavior is subjective. Awareness of the environment are two different things, apples and oranges. The latter depends on the complex nervous systems and brains, because for Taz, it all goes back to the brain, always the brain. Consequently, vertebrates, including fish, arthropods, and cephalopods, are probably sentient, but plants are not. You know why? Because they don't have a brain. That is really everything. Everything that they want to say is there. Don't have a brain. Therefore, a brain. Therefore, you don't know. These authors also argue that plants do not need sentience for their behaviors purely reactive and hardwired, because everything we just saw in this study is hardwired. Oh my God, I have to have so much patience. Goodness, goddess, please guide me to have so much patience, because I get so mad. Instead of subjective consciousness, plants evolve. I don't understand how this thinking is even useful. It's like blocking and instead of subjective consciousness, plants evolved adaptive behavior that is genetically determined by natural selection and epigenetically determined by environmental factors. And I think you're just a base cognition is reacting to the fear of what you will have to do and how you will have to apologize to plants when finally show you just how aware and attentive and conscious and cognitive they are. It's just my theory. Two caveats are in order. First, as shown in section 2 of our target article, the view that plant behavior is completely determined by either genetic or environmental factors is highly debatable in face of the evidence. Debatable. It's destroyable. Second, even if we cannot rule out the possibility that sentience emerges from the activity of a sophisticated nervous system, we have no empirical reasons to exclude the possibility that other forms of life have evolved different structures for sentience. The brain is not the only way. Along lines of such as functional equivalence between the mammalian midbrain and insect cephalic ganglion. Hence, even if we agree that ascribing sentience to plants may be premature, I do not agree with that, inasmuch as there is no consensus on what biological features are required for it, concluding that plants are not sentient because they lack brains, or neurons for that matter, which neurons is debatable according to Belushka, is just an assumption and begs the very question we are trying to address. In conclusion, more and more animal species are being considered as serious candidates for cognition and sentience, but plants still appear to be either excluded or forgotten in these considerations. We agree that the consequences of ascribing cognitive capacities, and especially sentience, to plants must be carefully weighed. Whether the object of scientific study is fellow humans, laboratory rodents, or plants, we need to bear in mind that in all three cases, cognitive capacities can only be inferred, and primarily from behavior. So just the fact that we don't recognize the behavior does not mean that there is no cognizance. The human and non-human animal studies, behavioral inferences can be complemented by cognitive neuroimaging methods, such as frequency modulated magnetic resonance imaging, in other words, fMRI, and position emission tomography, PET scanning. In studies on humans and other animals, these complementary methods have helped to test hypotheses, not only about their cognitive abilities, but also about their sentient states. The study of cognition and sentience in plants likewise stands to benefit from the future use of functional analogies of neuroimaging techniques. The potential toolkit for this includes MRI in intact plants. Don't dissect them, please. Please don't. Please don't. And ask their permission before you put them in the MRI machine. It's scary in there. Plant PET scanning and protoneuronal surface imaging techniques. We are aware of the extra burden of proof that research on plant sentience entails. Is it really extra? Is it? Or is it just the burden of proof? Oh my God. And the more detailed knowledge of plant behaviors is needed before we can make any confident claims about whether they are sentient. But irrespective of how much weight we put on the cognitive and sentient capacities of plants, the overall epistemic situation is not unlike the one that animal researchers face. As reviewed in section 2, the current evidence suggests that plants can adapt to their environment in flexible, context-sensitive, and risk-sensitive ways. All the kind of hallmark signs of cognition. They're able to anticipate future contingencies and can perhaps even learn and remember. Thus, since plants turn out to exhibit many of the cognitive abilities formerly assumed to be exclusive to animals, there is no reason to assume that they are incapable of insentience too. Not only does this list of potential cognitive abilities to be investigated include decision-making, learning, memory, anticipation, and communication, it includes valence 2, the organism's capacity to assign a value, advantage, good, harm, bad, to a particular stimulus, or the summary of information about its surroundings relative to its current state. Plants have evolved their own means of behaving adaptively. Let's say that again. Plants have evolved their own means of behaving adaptively through phenotypic plasticity instead of local motion. They don't move. I am sentient and I am sessile. I'm rooted in place, as is the case of animals who are locomotive. In escape tropism, for example, plants are aided instead by their own endogenously generated electric signals in assigning a negative value to adverse stimulus, which means they can judge good and bad. Hence, there is no reason to suppose that they could not have evolved their own physical structures for sentience too. Different than humans. Different but the same. Considerable caution is needed before reaching any conclusion. That's true. I'm not falling to their level. Sorry. Thank you, Beth. Sorry. And you know, we can't negate this one. Lots of brain people have brains and they don't use them. Are they sentient? I don't know. I think if we're going to argue for plant sentience without brains, we're going to have to argue that some people can be sentient that can be non-sentient with brains? Something to ponder. Considerable caution is needed before reaching any conclusion, but should the growing literature on plant behavioral repertoires and underlying electrochemical activity yield compelling enough evidence of plant sentience, then the ethical implications for our treatment of plants will need to be considered too. He finally addressed the elephant in the room. He finally addressed the elephant in the room. Very rarely do they address the elephant in the room. I'm glad he addressed the elephant in the room. The fear of this treatment. We hope that plant-related ethical decisions will be on the agenda in the future, or at least that the research findings reviewed in this target article are taken into account in the measures adopted for the protection of flora. In the study of plant sentience, we urge between the romanticism and the denial, doing the science. Caring for plants can only benefit us all in the long term. Boom. I liked it. I like the way they ended. I'm proud of them for ending that way. I think that was go Calvo. So, as I said at the very beginning, for those of you that were here at the very beginning, this article, which came out in Animal Communications, I think is what it's called, or Animal Sentience Journal, okay, is actually a call for commentary. In other words, when they published this, they specifically wanted for others to comment on them. So this is going to start a little bit of a stream of more of these. And I have to go look to see how many there are, because so I have to go look and see how much I can pull from this existing journal edition, because I have at least 3 other papers that are connected to this. One on animal communication and sentience that's related, one on plant sentience, not now, but maybe later, and another one on plant sentience revisited, which are these same articles. I mean, these same authors that are sifting through the different responses. So I'm actually looking forward, because we're going to have at minimum 3 other papers, but probably when I get into it, we're going to find a few more. So that was Plant Sentience Between Romanticism and Denial, Do the Science. I think it was an excellent paper because, Paco Calvo's been doing this a while, and him and Miguel Segundo-Ortin are really a great pair. We've now done several of the papers that they've written about, and pretty much most of the major papers that they've talked about as much as possible. A lot of the human neurobiology papers are actually behind firewalls. So again, if you're in an institution and you want me to do and review some of these papers, please send them to me. I don't have access to them because I don't have access to all those journals, especially the human neurobiology journals. But I'm very curious as to what is the most recent standing of human neurobiology against this. We're going to get some of it in this, because again, some are starting to talk, but I think that anybody who's writing in a publication like Animal Sentience most likely is somebody who's saying, maybe we're not ready, but probably in the future, and is not someone like Tays or Lincoln, which are some of the major opponents of doing this type of research. Either way, I'm invested. I'm here. I'm curious. I can't wait to see more. So I'm looking forward to getting deeper into this. As always, you can find all of the papers that we have talked about, all the ones that I've gone through, which are now probably numbering in about 70 or 80, if not more, on my website, tigregardenia.com/commentary. Many of them are actually, that's not true. All of them are in the naturally conscious community, and only from a certain period on are they on YouTube, to be honest, because I started all of this work in the naturally conscious community. So if you want to see all of them and, just do yourself a nice little marathon, they are all put together in one giant playlist in the naturally conscious community in Sprout discussions, programs, replays, or recordings, I think, programs, recordings. And so there you can see them. But either which way, there is an entry on my website under tigregardenia.com/commentary, and you will see them listed with their show notes and the details of what it is, and it'll show you the link to where it is that you have to go to find it. So I highly recommend, it's the holiday season is coming upon you. You might just sit back and watch a bunch of these and get an understanding of what's going on. Plus, in all of these on the bottom, I list out the paper on my website. The full show notes have on the bottom the reference so that you can go and discover this paper on your own, and you can go and read it and get an understanding for it. And hey, if you've got extra comments, you feel free to send them to me too, because I am excited to have them. So you can be your own little like researcher and go and get things done. So that being said, that is it. We have completed another episode of Plant Consciousness Commentary. I had hoped that we would have like a little outro, but I'm still working on it. I had my intro. I'm so excited. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to when we finish the little outro message. But for now, remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me. Tigre Agatenia. I'm out. Bye. Bye-bye.